All right, all right, all right. Okay, guys, I'm off camera tonight because I have a monitor issue on one of my screens. So it only lets me show it on one or it cuts you off. So I figured you'd want to see my pretty pictures instead of my pretty face. Today we are in the last session of Automation Project Manager. We've got a lot of information to go over tonight. So I'm kind of going to jam your brains full. As you know, as I've said in the past, the Automation Project Manager is a curriculum that's taken from the UiPath learning path in the academy. I did not go into the things like Automation Hub and some of the AI features and things that the academy class has, focusing instead just on the core principles. But if you want to go into that further, I think it's maybe 7 or 8 total modules. And you'll have a head advantage because you learned it from me. All right. If you remember the last couple of weeks, we talked about the automation implementation methodology. We talked about roles and responsibilities. Last week, we talked about the automation operating model. That's where we went into the core functions, supporting functions, agile, how you approach if you're doing predictive waterfall or adaptive agile or hybrid, those kind of subjects. Tonight, we're going to talk about moving the automation operating model to a steady state so that we can scale. And then we're going to talk about some things that can prevent you from actually scaling. This is the last session, and it is the 26th. So we're going to start by talking about 6 key processes of the automation operating model. You're probably familiar with these because we work with these every day, but we're going to put in a nice PowerPoint slide, and I'm going to talk about it anyway. We're going to talk about intake, which is probably the most important process you have in your automation operating model, sorry. Intake builds your pipeline. Intake is the process for new ideation. And let's talk about collaboration. This is a key word right here, collaborative. Whenever you go into an automation program, remember, we're talking at this level, we're talking about the automation program, not the projects that are within that program. So we're talking about you as an automation project manager, or maybe you're running the program operating within this larger structure, this larger organization within your business. So collaborative. When we work with people, we, like Diana or I were talking about earlier, we need to meet people where they're at. And that means that some people are going to be resistant. Some people are going to be excited about automation. Some people are going to have a neutral. They really don't care what you're doing. But the goal of collaboration is to get them thinking in an RPA mindset. And I like to, the voices in my head, and some of the other people that are unfortunate enough to work with me sometimes, we like to do evangelizing sessions. We call them RPA roadshows. Even when we're in the same organization and we've worked with other departments, not everybody talks to each other, and we can't assume they do. Some people form these self-form these silos. This is what my team does. I don't care about anything else that anybody else's team does, even though their work product may impact other teams, or they may be impacted by the work product of upline teams. So we need to learn to talk to people. We need to learn to explain to people. We need to learn to get people to buy in on automation. And we're not going to do it with everybody. There are going to be some constant resistors, those that are insecure in their jobs, insecure in their skill sets, and don't want to learn something new, want life to be like it has been. So we want to collaborate, because if we don't collaborate, we don't ideate. We don't ideate well, and we don't ideate effectively, and we don't really drive out the automation ideas or projects or opportunities that really will impact the organization and make us look like superheroes. We can all wear orange capes with the UiPath logo on the back. So when we ideate, we need to govern this ideation process, because you're going to get ideas that people, let me back up. So people in an organization don't always get the top-down message of mission, strategy, priorities, costs, they are more concerned about, like I said, what's going on in their area, what's going on in their department, what's impacting their daily work life. So we want to make sure we govern this process, that we can maintain that we're within the business drivers and the ideas are aligning to the goals of the organization. That means we're also the vehicles, the voices of the organization expressing those goals. You're coming to their level and talking to them, and not all CEOs do that. Not all CTOs or CFOs do that. So those, and even when they do, those messages can often go through so many different horizontal layers and into different silos and through the corporate grapevine and get diluted. So they don't necessarily line up to what the organization really wants. So you're kind of like a reinforcer in that scenario. When we do this ideation, this intake, we build a priority list. We talk about what automations align more quickly with the organizational goals. Let me explain that. So if you remember our quadrants, we have quick wins, low-hanging fruit, must-do, and long-term improvements. So quick wins are those that have high value, low complexity, and they really show up. That's where you're doing your POCs from. Low-hanging fruit are low complexity, but they really don't have the value, or they may not have any value. They're just things to do, things to maybe get an hour or two a week from somebody. Must-do improvements are medium complexity, and they have a higher value. So when we do our priority list, we want to look at, number one, we want to look at quick wins. And then if you're looking at your priority list and you're seeing a lot of low-hanging fruit and you're seeing a lot of medium complexity ones, after those quick wins, I know we talked about it a couple sessions ago, you want to jump into those must-do improvements. You want to keep that organization on a roll of seeing value coming from what you're automating. The long-term improvements and your low-hanging fruit could be used as POCs, or you can just fill those in as fillers when you're waiting or you're delayed on other things. But if you get those quick wins and those high ROIs, return on robot investments, you're going to see a lot more ideation come as the organization starts to realize more and more of what you're doing and how much you're saving and how much time you're giving them back from doing that. So this intake process includes identifying your opportunities, capturing detailed information. These are probably where the BAs are working in here. Your preliminary assessment, which is BA type of stuff, it'd be your PDDs, those kind of things. Detailed assessment would be, if you've ever worked with a solution architect, this is going to be the guy, and we'll talk about him in a minute again. This is going to be the guy that says, okay, well, we're going to do this process using apps and forms, and he's going to build out that solution and give that to the developer. We're going to talk about that a little bit. Priority list. This is where you're creating this guy after going through all of this process, and then you have this backlog. And we're also often revisiting our backlog and fine-tuning our backlog. And involved in this whole process is also this whole idea of front-end process improvement. I used to have a boss. Her name was Cheryl, sweetest lady. She was about 3 feet tall. And she said to me, just because we can automate everything doesn't mean we need to automate everything. So that really helps you to understand if you walk into intake with the mindset of, let's look at the process first and improve the process, because we don't want to build a broken process with automation. All right, intake. We have another slide about intake right here. So intake, in sum, prioritizes what we automate, encourages that ideation because we're collaborating. We're getting people to talk to each other. We're involving people. We're involving people that aren't managers. We're involving SMEs. We're involving clerks. We're involving people that may not feel important or their decisions mean nothing in the organization. You're giving them value. And it helps us to decide what to automate. That's that whole process of improvement part. And so your priority list is evaluating for feasibility, defines your business cases. I know it sounds like I'm reading off the slide because I am. identifies key contacts. And these, if you're talking, I've said this several times, our RACI model, those who are responsible, those who are accountable, those who are informed, and what's accountable, responsible, I forgot the C. Someone will help me with that, I'm sure. I just went blank. Here's your RACI model. You want to manage your contacts, manage the people that are going to be impacted by your automation. And everything on your priority list needs to have already been talked to with your IT and security folks. They need to know before you go and start automating something. And as you're prioritizing things, you need their input, because something that's good prioritized, something that's a good opportunity may be a bad opportunity when it comes to the systems, the system controls, and security controls. And this happens a lot when you're working in a government sector, where you're building for a federal sector. Is something that looks really easy ends up being just a bear because of security. Let's talk about the next one, design. This is what we were talking about earlier a little bit. Process design document is like a high level, as is, to be. These are the known exceptions, keystroke, screenshots, things like that. If you're lucky enough to work with someone that has task mining, you may have a flow already done by the platform. But this solution design guy is a detailed breakdown of your process design document. I'm going to explain this to you. So recently, I just finished solutioning an opportunity for our organization with a federal agency that wanted varying numbers of automations per year in varying complexities. And what you have to realize is a lot of agencies don't understand what complexity really means when it comes to automation. So they wanted us to teach them what complexity means. And when we did, we realized that we needed to add a solution architect to this response, because we needed that person because of the volume of automations they want to perform over this period of time. I'm trying to be politically correct without letting out our company secrets. I needed a solution architect to really take these process design documents and bear them down into more detailed solution design documents to give those developers a faster build time, a faster sprint of building, so we can build more than what we originally thought we would be building. So design is very important. And then we get into develop. And we all know what developers do. They turn that design into operational code. They do functional testing. They are using, hopefully, development standards. I'm going to talk about a couple things here that I've been pounding into your heads for four sessions now. Annotation and labeling. And remember, I talked about there are many happy paths to an automation. The happiest happy path is the one that is the most effective and sometimes the simplest, because if you think about what you're going to, and we're going to talk about support teams here in a minute, you're turning all that documentation over and all that code over to somebody that didn't build it, if you're building for another client. Or if you're building for an organization, you're part of the COE, automation COE, you may be building it and you may win the lottery in 2 days, like Diane and I hope we do every time we meet up each week. And that you won't be here tomorrow, because if I win the lottery tomorrow, well, I'll probably give my 2 weeks notice because I'm a glutton for punishment. I don't know if Diana would be here though. So you want to annotate. So if you're going to use a regex, don't assume people know what a regex does. You need to explain what that regex is doing in an annotation. If you're going to use a LinQ, don't expect people to know what function of X grouped by Y means. You're going to have to explain that. You want them to open up that code, and you want them to see exactly what it's doing and know exactly what it's doing and why it's doing it. We even annotate assigns where I'm at. Even if we annotate assign business exception, nothing. I think I've mentioned that before. And development standards. That should be part of your development standards, how you annotate, how many nested ifs you're allowed to use. Another big part of this is workflow analyzer. How do you want to set up the workflow analyzer? What rules do you want to incorporate? Do you want to incorporate custom rules? Are you going to use workflow analyzer? Because we require developers when they apply with us, I've told you this before, to complete an assignment. And they have to do 2 out of 3 possible choices. And we run the workflow analyzer on that each time, and they're surprised often how many workflow analyzer errors they came up with. Maybe it's 200, maybe it's 224. I've seen less and I've seen more, but it surprises them that our workflow analyzer is based on our best practices, and some of that's custom on our end, that they're not following those best practices. And a lot of that has to do with because we build and we turn it over to a support team. Then we get into testing. We all know what testing is. We've done functional testing at the development level, right? Or you should. If you're building modularly, you're not starting at the Go node in your flow chart and building straight through. You're building in invoked functions, and you're testing those functionally, testing A, then B, then C, then you're testing how A, B, and C integrate with each other. That's the development functional testing. I call it alpha testing. A lot of people call it functional testing. Then you have this whole UAT, the SME, the process owners, and your UAT results. Now remember, your UAT scripts are developed by your BA. So I often put in here, in our testing models, I stick a BA in here. Well, I have a BA test code before we turn it over to the SMEs and process owners to do UAT. That way I know that someone that's familiar with the automation, like the process owners or SME, is familiar enough to catch any mistakes that I make before I put it out to these guys and embarrass myself, right? Or make our organization look like we don't know what we're doing. And then we deploy. Now, I've said this before, in many organizations, deployment is not the job of the solution architect or the BA or the developer. It's usually handled by the internal IT department because they don't want you messing with their branches, or they're using Git or Azure or another source. So we deploy, we move it into production, and this involves smoke testing. I think we all understand what smoke testing is. We're testing the critical components of our code. We're doing a soft release. We may be releasing that to just a handful of users instead of the general audience. I think we're all familiar with this if you're part of the UiPath Insider Previews, how they release certain changes or certain new products to be privately previewed by members of that Insider Preview program before they release that to the general audience, so that we can play with it, we can tell them where it's not working effectively, or we can make suggestions before they put it out to general audience and embarrass themselves or make everybody believe that UiPath is not where they are on with Gartner. We have a lot of documentation we're giving off here. We're giving off the run book. Run book should be a very detailed technical document. You don't need to use a technical writer, but it should be a very detailed user guide. It's just a user manual. This is what your automation is doing, and it should have pretty pictures, diagrams, test cases, and the results of all that. You don't own any of that. That's all owned by the organization or the client if you're building for a client. During this process of deployment, we want to make sure our support teams are ready because they're fixing to get it after we get let go of it. And we want to talk about hypercare. Sometimes with quick wins, hypercare is several weeks. Sometimes with must-do improvements or long-term improvements, your hypercare can last up to 90 days in some cases. And that only means if hypercare, and I know we probably all know what it means, but I'm going to say it in case somebody doesn't. It just means that if something does go wrong on an automation that's in hypercare, that automation has priority in getting break fixes. And when we break fix something, we also have to remember all this documentation needs to somehow be updated on what we fixed, right? Now, at this point, you typically aren't going to have change requests. Change requests at this point, once you've deployed, are going to be something that goes in your backlog. And let's talk about, I think that's what we're going to talk about this. No, we're going to talk, yeah, we are. This is your support function. They're managing the knowledge, the issue identification. They're reporting those issues during hypercare, and they're doing all the triaging and resolution. That means that's why your code has to be annotated and labeled. Now, these obviously are going to be people that are in the COE, the automation COE, that know how to code and know how automations work. or in your organization, you may have a maintenance team, or you may have junior developers, or you may have other developers that you can pass this off to and have them do the fixes. And here's where we come into change request management. You'll see on this next slide that change request management takes on a different function here. If you remember when I talked before, we talked about change requests. We had standard, normal, and emergency. Normal changes would be something that required approval. Standard changes would be something along the lines of, hey, can I have an Outlook email here, or can I have a log message? And emergency was some application problem that would prevent the automation from working. Here it looks a little bit different. Here's the nature of the changes recorded, the reason, the complexity of it, and then you can see what's its priority and backlog. So changes to automations that are already deployed are new automations or modifications to an automation that are put into backlog. And then you prioritize those like you did during the intake part. So change management is a different monster here than it was when you were building, because you've already built it and deployed it. Now the change management takes on a new look. All right, let's talk about steady state implementation plan. It's a lot of words, and I'm probably gonna get tongue-tied doing this. It's very simple. Mobilization means you need people. You cannot scale an automation operating model without people. Remember, we're talking at the program level. We're not talking at the project level. We're talking at a program level. You cannot scale it without people, skilled people, people that know what they're doing, people that are in training, people that are upskilling, people that can take on diverse roles. I know in our organization, we cross-train our developers to be business analysts. And we cross-train our business analysts to be associate level developers. And I think I talked about this last week. It's so we can pivot for the client, we can be more efficient and more effective for the client, and we have a smoother, more standardized communication. And so we don't have all the back and forth business analysts running back. The business analyst knows what questions to ask, and vice versa. So you need team members. You need to plan the resources. You need to train the people. You need to continually train the people. You need to incentivize them to train, and you need to reward them for the training. You will run into some developers that don't want to learn the BA skills. So we strongly encourage our developers. We don't require, but we strongly encourage it. But then they start to see that they're placed in different, more dynamic, more exciting roles than just sitting in a cubicle or on their desk at home building. They're actually planning and they're getting more involved. So we actually see an uptick when people start cross-training and upskilling in their excitement about being part of the AOM. Iterative implementation plan. That's a big fancy word, isn't it? That's just, if you remember, we introduced the project charter, which provides the guardrails for your organization's automation operating model program. The project charter is, if you remember, we talked about it's a living document. Organizational priorities change, they mature, they may change if they buy a new organization. They may change if they divest themselves or change any part of their mission. Maybe they're introducing a new product somewhere. So that organizational charter, that project program charter changes. So does our approach to the AOM model. We have to continually go back and define new processes, new tools. And this is especially poignant to me because I started using UiPath RPA back before it was even considered what we call now 2018 UiPath RPA. Back then it was low code, no code, drag and drop. There wasn't AI, there wasn't forms, there wasn't even an RE framework back then. So as the tools and the resources that we use change, so does our approach to automation. So we continually revisit that plan, update it, update the roadmaps, add to the roadmaps, make sure we have the right resources. We're constantly going back and refining it because we have to refine our automation operating model. Because if we don't, we're scaling a broken process, again, a broken model, and we're trying to scale it. And when you try and build on a foundation, a home foundation that's cracked and crumbling, your house is going to crack and crumble, right? Tools, processes. This could be new Gits or new source controls. This could be, hey, we want to bring in autopilot, or we want to marry this with Microsoft Copilot. These are new tools and processes that we can bring into our automation operating model to enhance our offerings, enhance what we can do. Our automation developers not only do UiPath, let me back that up. Our intelligent automation developers not only do UiPath, they do document understanding, communications mining, and task mining and process mining. They also do Microsoft Copilot and Microsoft Power Platform. So we're continually training our staff to learn the new skills. And so when we bring in some of those new developments, we want to make sure that we have the right tools and processes. It makes us stronger as an organization. We can do more, we can satisfy more needs, and people start to know who we are. And if you're building for a company that you're currently with, and your company takes note that, hey, there's so much more we can do. We can do so much more if we add these tools in. All we need to do is spend the money. You're able to build a justification to spend that money. Execution, communication, integrity. I'm going to throw out some words. Communication, integrity, transparency. Looking forward to how all these automations work together so that we can develop a larger integrated project. And take all and integrate all these builds together. For example, I had a automation at a company I worked for that started very small, but then it ended up touching 17 different departments and 10 different systems. And it was a huge monolith of an automation that it took 4 or 5, I think it was 4. No, because maybe it was 5 because Matt was on there. It took 5 developers to build that automation. It took us about 6 months, and testing on that took about another 6 months. But it saved that organization millions of dollars a year because they were able to get rid of vendors and contractors and even an entire system just by doing that automation. So execution, look to the future, apply lessons learned. And this is, you Agile folks understand this. What did we learn? What did we do right? What must we do different? What did we do good? Type of questions that you usually visit when you're in a retrospective. So we want to apply lessons learned. Once this continuous improvement on our AOM model is refined and matured, then we scale. We don't scale before then. Then we scale because we know we're scaling a pristine model, and we know we're scaling a well-built and a well-rounded model. All right. Focus areas: technology, managing infrastructure, platforms, license management, saving costs, measuring utilization, optimizing idle bots, and capacity for cost, while maintaining, I should footnote here, segregation of duties and SOX and GRC requirements. Change management enablement. We're training as our automation operating model changes. We're retraining and we're continually training. Quality assurance. This is a very big one, and it gets into what we're going to talk about in a few minutes about expectations. Even if you built a high quality automation, if you didn't meet the expectations of the client, you did not meet the quality requirements of that client. So we want to set up gates, and we want to really make sure that we're implementing quality checks. Operational support, service definitions, complexity. This is a big one. I talked a few minutes earlier about some federal agencies don't necessarily have the same realization or conceptualization, I should say, of complexity. And sometimes we don't as developers. Sometimes we don't realize how complex something can be until we start playing with it and start trying to develop it. Business analysts don't always know how complex something can be. And you really don't know that until you get your hands in the dirt, right? But an agreement on definitions is important during your kickoff meetings. Everybody needs to be on the same page of this is what we conceptually think our complexity is. This is what you think it is. Let's agree on that complexity definition, because that's going to drive your SLAs. It's going to drive the expectations of the organization on when you're going to be done something with something, and it's going to help you scale your AOM. Reporting and analytics. We like numbers. We like pictures. We like pie charts. We like PowerPoint slides. We like getting people. Individuals are 90% visual. Our brain recognizes and learns visually 90% of the time, and through hearing 10% of the time. Touch, taste, smell, all that is that extra 10%. So we want to make sure we're giving them reports. We want to make sure that we're giving them dashboards, insights, Tableau if you want to tap into Tableau. We want to make sure they have and they can see very easily, very quickly, the return on their investment. Because then again, you're going to get more investment if they can see it. All right. Scaling structure. Let's get into this a little bit. How we scale our automation operating model. We're going to talk about 3, and we're going to spend a slide on each of those. And trust me, I'm almost done. I think we have about 5 or 6 more slides. So let's start on this first one. 1 COE. I don't know of many organizations anymore, well, there may be some, that have a single COE. You may find it more often in a federal public sector. Many of the commercial sectors have more than 1 COE or a different variation of COEs. The benefits of this COE is it's cheap. You can govern it better. You can govern development standards better. You can control that development. You control the activities of BA. You can control the documentation more because it passes through this single point, right? The drawbacks are everybody in an organization has their own priorities, like we were mentioning earlier, meeting somebody where they're at. And their priorities are going to be more important than another person's priorities because they have the ownership of that priority. They have the accountability for that priority. They've given it to you for backlog, and now they want you to build their stuff. And this is the problem with a 1 COE, because you have these varying priorities and they're all operating through 1 COE, right? So you have these bottlenecks in your backlog. You have slower deployments because it's all 1 COE, and this 1 COE is handling all functional business areas, right? Let's talk about hub and spoke. This is something that's going to be more commonly found in organizations. It's going to be where you have determined that there's so much volume in this area that you need a separate COE just to handle this, or this may be a functional department, this may be finance, right? This may be IT, right? This may be warehouse operations, distribution, something like that, right? So you have multiple COEs handling, which is much more efficient, right? You're efficient, you're balancing it, and you're able to really leverage the knowledge base in your business units, right? You don't have 1 COE managing the entire knowledge base or with their BAs running back and forth. You have the knowledge base managed within the COE. However, the drawbacks of that, as you can see on the slide, is you lose governance over standards and controls and even security sometimes. And you have to this guy has to kind of manage these guys, which becomes dynamically difficult if this guy is managing these guys as well. So you have to really think about before you go into a hub and spoke, whether that's the right program for you. And this next slide is going to be a little bit more dramatic. And I do know of a gentleman, a friend of mine that runs a COE that is like this. Each business or each functional area of his organization has its own COE. He even has some development groups that operate outside of a COE that do separate development for special projects. So he has a very complicated model but he builds very quickly. And he's able to target much more effectively because there's a COE for each unit, right? There's not a backlog in the pipeline. Sometimes his problem is he doesn't have any pipeline left for some of these guys, and he has to go back out and evangelize and get more, right? But this is very costly. This is very full-time head equivalent costly. A lot of people have to do this. It takes more time, effort, and resources, not only human capital, but dollar capital for the organization. So this is probably going to be something that's found more in a global organization, more in a multi-regional organization, a huge vendor like, I don't know, maybe a Walmart. I'm not talking about Walmart being this friend I know, but it could be that kind of organization, something huge that can afford this type of investment and really get an impact from this type of investment. All right, let's talk about best practices for your AOM. Start with the vision and strategy. We never just go into something without a plan, right? We want to make sure that we can trace everything we do back to the organization's vision and strategy, because that's what the organization or your client is measuring your success on, right? Is that vision and strategy. Understand the key challenges of the organization, whether they're a public organization, for example, on the New York Stock Exchange and are subject to SOX rules. Whether they're a public sector organization, some of their security requirements. Know what challenges that they have, because your job is to meet those challenges and make sure. We talked about risk management, whether we avoid the risk, whether we ignore the risk, whether we accept the risk, or whether we transfer the risk, right? That's what you need to understand, those challenges, because risk will come into your projects. You need to understand how that risk can be handled. Critical path interactions. We talked about it a couple minutes ago. We talked about the RACI model. We talked about the people you need to watch, the people you need to monitor closely, the people you just need to inform, the people you need to only to keep satisfied. There may be people that you need to keep informed that they don't have any care about what you're doing, but eventually it may touch them. So you want to make sure that they're informed. Plus, at the same time, you're evangelizing RPA to those people. Iterative evolutionary approach, we just talked about that a little bit. You have to keep going back and re-examining where you're at, figure out where you need to grow, whether it's in headcount, whether it's in resources, whether it's in systems, whether you need to spin up more servers and buy more licenses, more unattended bots, whether you need to go into a citizen developer program. Incorporate evolution into the plan. That's kind of building on the same idea. And you want to be efficient. You want to think of outside the box like we did when we encouraged cross-training. You want to be more efficient, more effective, because it's not only going to save the company, you're going to do better for the organization or the client. You're going to have fewer headaches. You're going to be able to fill gaps in FTEs quicker and faster, and you'll have less build stoppage. Right? Because whenever we stop building, we're still piling into the backlog. We've got automations that haven't been built, may not be built. We have to keep reprioritizing based on what's coming in, based on our ability to do those. So we want to always think outside the box about how you can better your automation operating model. And finally, before we go for questions or Diana says a joke and jars you awake, we're going to talk about some challenges to steady state building and scaling. Expectations. Most automation projects, and I talked about this when we talked about quality, are failing because there was not an agreement on expectations in the kickoff meeting. You didn't have a correct conceptualization of the client's expectations. The client changed their expectations or had a different idea of what the expectation was just by miscommunication. Their satisfaction is our goal, whether we're building in-house for our company, or whether building for a client. It's not our satisfaction, it's their satisfaction. That's our job. we may get excited about some code ideas we came up with, and we obviously annotated them and explained them, or some new concepts we introduced. That's satisfying for me. We want to see the customer happy. That's satisfying for me. But we need to make sure their expectations are understood, and by repeating them back, by writing them down, by making sure that everybody's on the same page, so that at the end of the day, when you're done and deployed, it's doing what they want it to do. Scope creep. That's where we promise to deliver an engagement, and this could involve what we call technical debt as well. We determine scope back when our business analysts and our solution architects are back way in the design phase. We're talking about scope, right? We may have to break scope and say, okay, that's going to have to be something for something else. And we manage scope during that build using change control processes, the standard, normal, and emergency changes. We're controlling scope creep. Then we control scope again on deployment when we turn it over to the support staff, because then that change control process changes. And it goes down into that backlog where we're putting that. That's how we control scope creep. We don't want them to have a different expectation of what we promised to build and didn't build. Now, some organizations will say, well, we want the MVA, minimal viable, MVP, minimal viable product, sorry. And then anything that's left, that we just want to do this core critical thing, anything else that we have left in this project, we want to do that as, we're going to hold that as technical debt. We can work on that later after we get this one running, this piece of it running, I should say. So we may automate A, B, and C, and then leave D through F as technical debt. That's not necessarily considered scope creep. And that's sometimes something that we can easily throw into a backlog, but it's going to be a higher priority in that backlog because it's considered technical debt. Another thing that really destroys an automation operating model or a project within that model is a very confused, chaotic user acceptance testing. As I said, your BA should be very familiar with how to build a UAT test plan, and that should be done very early in the model. Your developers are going to develop UAT test scripts in conjunction with your solution architect, if you're lucky enough to have one of those guys or girls. Those test scripts and that UAT test model should be very clear, very simple to understand, laid out in a process in a way that people can readily look at it and understand it. You don't want to have all these pathways. You want to do a simple Excel spreadsheet with your tests. You want to have simple test results, pass, fail. You don't want to say almost passed, almost failed. You want to have pass, fail. Access delays. This is common in the federal sector where we're trying to get into systems and we have to go through layers and layers of IT security folks, which I understand. It's government information. It's often classified information, depending on your clearance, that you get to see a lot of PII. So access delays to systems is very much a common factor for delays in production, delays in development, delays in getting something even approved to move into production, or access delays. So that's why in the kickoff meeting, we bring in the IT team in the kickoff, right? And that's why we show them that priority list and that backlog constantly, so they know what's on the horizon and they're in the initial stages of the project. Now, I'm not talking about program at the kickoff meeting. I'm talking about each project within that program should have a kickoff meeting. And in that kickoff meeting, your IT team needs to be in there so they understand readily what you're going to be doing, what's it designed to do, what systems it's going in, and you're going to work with them to facilitate that. And then here's the big one for me. I don't know how many times I've ever called a SME or a process owner and they're on vacation, they're on PTO, they're in meetings all day, they don't have time to get back to me, and they don't necessarily realize that if they don't get back to me, I'm not able to do anything on their automation, right? And so the lack of availability of them when you need them is very common. And it's going to be one of the biggest challenges you're going to face, especially when you're working with a client contract or a large project that involves multiple departments, multiple people, multiple systems, and multiple upline and downline outputs or inputs. So it's always a good thing in the kickoff meeting, and your process owner will be in the kickoff meeting, but it's always a good point throughout the automation project, not the program, but at this level, but the project level, is to continually communicate them. Send them an email, send them an update. We never do. Now the government requires, when you work for the federal sector, they require monthly reports and cadenced meetings, but in an organization, that's not always the truth. So I always used to set up reminders on my calendar. Hey, reach out to this department, say, this is where you're at in your automation. Just let you know. I don't have any blockers right now, but I just want to know where you're at. So that that level of communication, when they see an email from me, they're getting an update, and it's not something that I'm just bothering them with. All right. That takes us to the end of this last session. And I think, Diana, we have about maybe 12 minutes left.
Okay, so I don't see any questions in the chat. This was a great session, Chris. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Thank you everybody for joining tonight. If you guys want to take yourself off mute, and just let us know if there's any questions you have, or if there's anything you'd like us to talk more about in future sessions, or anything at all.
I know Diana and I were talking about doing a session on data services in November, so we'll probably do that one.
It's a great series. Thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Thank you.
Agree. Really enjoyed the series. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Nina.
Chris, you've
Yeah.
been doing this for a while. We can tell.
Oh, yeah. How many years is it now, Diana? 3?
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, Cole, I think data services would be a great subject to cover because you can't find a lot out there on it.
That's true.
Solution management is another one.
Yeah, we could do that.
Okay. Thanks, Cole.
And Diana, weren't you saying you're going to try to do a BA one?
Yeah, I'm going to do that later this year. Yep. Awesome. Good suggestions. Thanks. All right. Well, you guys enjoy your
Long weekend.
evening, and as I told Chris, the end of the summer. It's coming to an end shortly, so we appreciate you spending your time with us. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.